Hey everyone, thank you for joining our webinar this morning on revolutionizing your sandboxes. We're going to get started in about 60 seconds, just going to give some time for some more people to join. Thanks. All right, let's go ahead and get started on our webinar today. Just some quick housekeeping notes. Y'all are going to be muted, but you do have the ability to ask questions or chat in the chat box. Please ask questions. We'd love to answer anything that we can for you. And if for whatever reason we can't, we'll find the answer and get back to you personally as soon as possible. And we will be recording this session and sending out a copy to all registrants and attendees tomorrow on the 15th. Without further ado, my name is Joe Marshall. I'm the Demand Gen Manager here at Prodly, and I have the privilege of introducing our speaker, Abby Malvestuto, who's going to be taking us through revolutionizing your sandboxes. So without further ado, take it away, Abby.
Hey, awesome. So thanks everyone for being here this morning. As Joe said, I'm the product marketing specialist here at Prodly. So we are very excited to talk about sandboxes, right? So basically where we're at, um, in a perfect world, we know that sandboxes are supposed to be the quintessential tool in order for us to develop and create and test, and to do that safely without making changes in production. So this is a really good example of what a normal landscape would look like. But as everyone knows, there's too many issues regarding this little tree here. So how are sandboxes supposed to work in the first place? We know this. Ideally, right, we want to be able to move data from production into these little dev boxes down here at the bottom in order for our devs and our admins to create and test things with. Now, Salesforce best practice is going to basically echo this exactly, saying, hey, you guys should be using your dev boxes, one dev box per project or one dev box per dev even. That's why they give us so many, which is great. So obviously, the dev boxes are only as good and as useful as the data that is in them. So ideally, once you have seeded those sandboxes with accurate and up-to-date data that lives in production, you want to be able to move that data, right? So after that initial period is over, the ability to say, hey, these new features have been added, they've been created, they've been tested, let's take it to the next level. We want to be able to promote those new features and changes up into staging, partial, sometimes you'll call it UAT, sometimes that's also in succession, depending on what your landscape looks like. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we want to be able to move it back down into that dev box in order to change it, test it again, move it back up into staging. We don't want to be limited, right, by moving that data here, there, and everywhere. We should be able to move it up, down, and sideways without the headache. This process should be effortless, right? And then after that, once we've gone through and said, hey, everything looks good, we've got the warm and fuzzies for all these new enhancements, let's move everything back up into production. This is change management. This is the life cycle of your app, of your environment, of your Salesforce, license. This is everything. This is the lifeline. But we know that this is not always going to be the case, right? We know that this is broken. We know this is a headache. So that's kind of what I wanted to really talk about today. Why is this such a headache? Why can't we achieve sandbox bliss? We know this. Unfortunately, Salesforce does not make this process easy on us, right? Again, a sandbox is only as useful as the data in it. We know it has to be accurate, it has to be up to date, aka it has to be in sync with production. This means that refreshing the environments needs to happen as frequently as possible, or the alternative being, right, the painstaking process of having to manually recreate all of these records and a lot of the data from production into these lower environments. That is a huge time consumption, huge time waster. As we all know, almost every single time a record moves across your landscape, depending on where it's moving from and where it's moving to, the record ID changes. My God. So despite it being Salesforce best practice to have one dev box per project or per dev, many have to rely on full and partial copy sandboxes in order to get anything done because they don't want to waste the time of having to go through and manually track all these record ID changes, right? Unfortunately, that is not feasible for everyone. Sometimes it's due to budget constraints. We know it's a big spend in order to go through and have those full and partial copy sandboxes, as easy as they are to do this with. But then, even if you do have the budget for days, and you've got all these full and partial copy sandboxes, you're still limited by refresh cycles. We cannot tell you how many times we've run into the situation where it would be nice to be able to move things that are done from these dev boxes into full and partial, but you can't do that because you're bottlenecked by whatever all other projects are happening in those environments by the rest of your team, maybe different teams that are using the same sandboxes, right? So also with that, um, you're essentially held hostage by what's going on in full and partial. And then as time goes on, the data that's in full and partial is so far removed from, your source of truth, which is prod, that is the data even good anymore? You want to be able to refresh, but you can't. So, that, and we know that storage space within dev boxes is limited. So as much as it would be awesome to have your dev boxes be this exact replica of production, it's out of the question. We know that you can't do that. So again, next best thing is going to be just replicating the data you care about, which again, back to the first bullet point, it's a manual process and it sucks to do, and we know it. So what do we do? It is time to take back the control. It's time for a revolution. What would this even look like? If we could have a promised land for sandboxes, and I'm telling you this from experience, what would it look like? What would it feel like to be able to have this? No more bottlenecks with your full and your partial copies, okay? We're so tired of doing things this way. There has to be a better, faster, more efficient way. You no longer have to be limited by Salesforce refresh cycles even, right? So we know that for certain sandboxes, you can only refresh 30, 60, 90 days. Well, not anymore. Now you can refresh, do standing refreshes, maybe just refresh certain objects from production. Great. Maybe you want to do that for dev, full, partial, UAT, you name it. You don't have to risk writing over someone else's work because you get to choose what you move when you move it. I want to be able to know more. I don't want to manually keep track, basically, of record IDs anymore. I'm done with it. I'm done with it. It's a headache. It's a waste of time to manually do that. And then on top of that, having to go in after the fact, I've gone through the process of setting everything up. I've gone through the process of waiting for the migration to be complete. And now what? I have to go into the destination and manually connect the dots in the destination so I can make sure all of my lookups are the way they need to be. So that way I can make sure all the related lists came over. What about my knowledge articles, attachments, things like that? That's a whole that's a whole different issue and a whole nother headache. And again, tired of wasting precious resources to do a lot of manual, monotonous work. That's people and teams that could be actually developing and enhancing. Instead, they're just bogged down with doing this very laborious work. I want to be able to move any record to any environment, any data, any environment. I want the ability to move as many objects I want at the same time. That is amazing. I want the peace of mind knowing that what I am moving is going to be moved correctly. I want to be able to have an automatic system of checks and balances to know that I got everything that I cared about, right? And if anything went wrong, I want to know what it was and how I can fix it. I want to be able to have full granular control over how my data moves down to the individual fields, right? The ability to automate all of this, that is just a time saver. I want to be able to say, this is what I want to move, set it, and forget it. Hit a button, I can go do other things while this is running, and I don't have to sit there and babysit it. I want it to automatically do those things that I was saying earlier to connect all of the dots, look up fields, related lists, so on and so forth. I don't want the headache. I don't want to waste the time. To automatically obfuscate data would be amazing. The ability to do this for not one, but multiple boxes at the same time, right? If you want to get an entire team ready and ready to go and start creating and testing, I don't want to have to sit there and set up one box at a time. I want to do it multiple. Um, and again, the ability to move thousands of records or an entire implementation, CPQ, advanced approvals, whatever the case is, FS, with a single click. And again, going and doing something else, I don't have to worry about it. And what if I want something that is going to be easy for the admins to use, but also something that's a little bit more robust for the dev teams? What if my dev teams want to be able to go through and do API calls? What if they want to use, Scratch orgs? Or maybe they're used to the CLIs. They want to get super extra with it, and just really customize it and automate everything with it. Cool. I want the ability to do that. I want the freedom to do that. And then on top of it all, I want to be able to move data and metadata at the same freaking time. I'm done having to go through and use change that's for one thing, and then I have to log in here, log in there, click in 50 million different places. It's very tedious. And really, it causes a lot of strife. Like the IT department wants to make sure that we are, maintaining governance and audit tracking and so on and so forth. But, sales wants it done now. And we've got change requests coming in, and these admin and dev teams are just swamped. And more often than not, you have admins and devs that are working overtime, working long hours in order to make sure that they can actually enjoy their holiday season. Are you kidding? No, something that's simple. I want intuitive. I want it going within minutes, not days, not weeks, minutes. And then also something that it would be great if it was within the same Salesforce UI so that I know that I'm covered by Salesforce's incredible compliance standards. I don't have to worry about it. It's within Salesforce. I know I'm taken care of. So ergo, IT, happy IT. But is that a pipe dream? Is the sandbox vision, as I just described it, even a reality? turns out I found out that is entirely the case. So I'm going to actually walk you through these things and show you what it looks like. So if anyone has any questions or anything that they'd like to throw in chat, now be the time to do it, because you're about to actually see it. So let me pull it up really quick. How are we doing with everything, Joe?
Doing all right. Yeah, if you just want to move on to sharing your demo org.
You got it. So here we are. Everything as I have just described it to you is right here at my fingertips. Welcome to Prodly Appops release. So essentially what this looks like, I want to be able to come in here and choose the data that I care about moving. For example, let's see. Look at all of these pre-built templates that I didn't have to make. That's another thing. Don't want the headache of having to try and figure it out. It'd be great if I could just go in, find a template that encompasses the data I care about, the objects that I care about, and let me just use that as a good starting point, which is exactly what we did here. So here's the data set. Let's pull this up and I can show you what this looks like. I don't have to move one object at a time. I basically get to come in here, create a schema for what I care about moving. So let's go here. In this case, I want to move accounts, opportunities, cases, and contacts at the same time with one button. So let's see here. Oh, look, here are the lookups that I have included. Here's the API name of the field that is included in that lookup. I know immediately, am I missing objects? Great, I can add them. But in this case, I'm not. Am I missing fields? Is there a lookup field that I know that exists here that needs to be included? I can see it in an instant. I don't have to guess. It's right there. We are good. Okay, cool. This looks good, and that looks good as well. So if I wanted to make this data set wider, I can show you how. It's just going to be a checkbox. If I wanted to make this deeper, let's say I wanted to drill in and each one of these objects has its own level of settings, and they're going to look just like this. Awesome. Here's my root object. Every other object that was in this data set stems from account. Do I want to bring in specific accounts? Great. Here's a SOCL query. Am I trying to move things into a dev box? And I do not want to move every single account into my dev box because space limitations. So let's say I want to bring these over, but I want to limit it to maybe the first 50. Why not? Yes, I can do that. Great. In addition to that, here's all my object fields. Each one of these fields has its own settings. Oh, finally. Email. Let's do this. Do I want to set a random value? Is this a sensitive field that I don't want people outside of my admin team to be able to see? This is especially useful for teams that maybe they are outsourcing their stuff or they have an entire team dedicated to development and they don't want them having real addresses, real phone numbers, real socials, things like that. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and set a random value. I'm just going to click it. And that's it. And I'm done. No extra steps, no other layers. That's it. Additionally, this is an email address field, and I don't want to end up like the HBO intern, so we're going to turn on a fixed value, right? You can do this, or right here, postfix. We're going to add dot invalid. Bingo. So as soon as this hits the destination, it'll be the actual email address plus dot invalid, and we will not be sending out any emails from lower environments. Done. Great. What if I was dealing with a field that needed to have a delayed value? You'll see this often when working with something like CPQ. Yes, you can turn off the triggers, but there are still certain fields where they need to have certain requirements that are met as a result of that field in order to move it. So you can actually say, hey, we're going to delay this on insert. I'm going to put a temporary value in here. After the deployment is complete, then revert that back to whatever it was in the source. Done. Set it, forget it. We are good. In addition to that, let's say I wanted to actually go through and do text ID mapping. This is perfect. I don't have to go through the painstaking process of figuring out how to move and then reconnect things like logos. You know, that's a perfect example of that in the destination. I can just do the mapping straight from here. And again, set it and forget it. I hit a save button and I'm good. Here's all the parent relationships to the account object. Is there anything else that I wanted to include? Hey, look, we have a lookup on the account to whoever the CSM is for that account. Yeah, let's do that too. So I clicked a checkbox and it's in. Easy peasy. We're going to undo that. Oh, that's easy too. Child relationships. All of them. They're right here. If I wanted to search for it, I absolutely could. So let's do accounts. Let's see what we have under. Okay. Here's all of my contact stuff. Great. Looks like contact is already here. Do I want to include an order on this? Nah. Essentially, what I'm telling Appops is, of all the child relationships that I've included here, I know that Appops is smart enough to choose the correct order of operations for me. I don't have to know the correct order for schema. I don't. So for maybe even unseasoned admin users that want to come in here and say, hey, here, I want to move an account. I want to move some contacts, some cases, some opportunities. Can Appops just figure out the correct order so I don't have to do it and then mess it up and then have to redo it and redo it again? Yeah, we can do that. The other thing too is pretty cool, is to be able to simulate this. I am scared about moving objects and making sure that all these records are going to come over correctly. I don't care that I'm moving it just from a dev box into partial. That's still a big move. And I want to make sure that this is going to behave the way that I intended it to. I can simulate that first. So that's part of that. So now let's say that this data set is ready to go. It's already saved. So now I'm just ready to move it. I can tell someone else on my team if I really wanted to come in here and say, hey, I just created that data set. Could you go ahead and do a quick seed with that data set from production into your dev box? Sure. But why don't we move it multiple places? Sure. If you wanted to put it in 5 different dev boxes, absolutely. Now, what if I wanted to move it to the same source and destination? You know what? We are stuck in staging right now. Unfortunately, we've got multiple teams, multiple projects, but we need to do a refresh, and I can't refresh the entire environment, but I need new data. I need accurate data. I need those accounts, contacts, and opties in here. Well, you can do a standing refresh. Use the same source and the same destination. You can come in here. We're going to deactivate all those events. Choose the existing data set, and you are solid. Good to go. You know, like let's say there's another team member that came in there that wanted to use your data set, but maybe they wanted to change the query. They can put that in here too. And that's not going to save to the data set. So that's a one-time use query. So that way you have multiple team members using the same data set. They don't have to recreate it. They don't even have to go into the settings and mess with it. They can just do it straight from here. If they wanted to see a sandbox, sure. They just, maybe this test dev box is brand spanking new and they just want to move a couple things, reactivate all events. I'm going to tell it, hey, I want to move some accounts from production to test dev. Maybe I didn't already have a data set created for it. I want to make one on the fly. Cool. So let's do that. Here's some accounts. Let's see. Oh, here's opportunity. Let's include that. Here's case. Let's do that too. Awesome. Well, cool. Let's do some products. Hey, look at that. Appops is smart enough to know that there's no way you're going to be able to move these objects unless something like this is included first. So again, automatic system of checks and balances. I know what these dependencies are now. Cool. We can do that on the fly. And so if you wanted to do that, but let's say you wanted to not include certain lookups, you can do that right here on the spot as well. So another amazing time saver. So let's actually see what this looks like in real time. I kind of think I want to actually kick off a deployment here. So let's do that. An existing data set, cool. From production to this. Deployment name. We're gonna say, we're gonna do a mock deployment, if I can spell today. Cool. Let's see, validate, deploy. Well, I didn't include any metadata, but if I wanted to, I could. So I don't need to validate. We're just gonna hit deploy. And I'm gonna let this run. Here's everything else that I did. Looks like I did that. Here we go. Oh, looks like Haley did these ones. On these, here we go. Awesome. Let's see what this looks like if I hit this. I want to see what it's doing in real time. Cool. Here we go. Started. Awesome. While this is running, I could be doing a million other things. I don't have to worry about it, but I'm curious. Oh, so this is what Appops is actually doing behind the scenes that I don't have to worry about. Even better.
Abby, while we wait for that to finish up, we do have one quick question. You
Sure.
referenced metadata a little bit, but this question was about both metadata and rollback, and if this process is supported with both rollback and metadata.
Oh, yeah. So, as I pointed out before, if you wanted to include metadata and data together, this is essentially what it would look like. I loaded the metadata, so here it is. It's going to give me a visual diff between source and destination of the metadata, right? So I can come in here and say, oh, all right, let me do this one. I want to move some permission sets. Looks like Haley was the one who made this change. This is the date that she made it. So I know exactly that this is the metadata component that I care about. I'm going to choose my validation test option. We're just going to leave it as default. These are all the same tests that Salesforce does. I'm used to default. I'm just going to leave it with default. And then if I wanted to, bingo. Maybe I don't want to deploy data just yet. I just care about the metadata. I would like to validate that. So I'm just going to run it through a quick validation. And notice this is running at the same time that this is running. I don't have to worry about messing anything up just because I'm running an actual deployment and I'm still validating separate metadata. What this means is, yes, you can have multiple team members in Appops doing their own projects all at the same time. It's not going to ruin anything. So yes, as far as metadata is concerned, that's what that looks like. Validation is complete. As far as rollback goes, this is huge. We do rollback for data, record data. If I wanted to come in here, I'm just going to come in and set up that integration. We support Bitbucket, GitHub, and Azure DevOps. As soon as I set this up, it's going to ask me for an OAuth. I'm going to do a handshake. And then it's going to set up branches in my repository for each one of these environments. Then I can tell Appops, these are the objects that I want to back up before I do a push into any of these environments. Save that snapshot. If I need to do a rollback, you would come in here, hit this drop down button, and then it would actually give you the option to deploy from your VC, deploy from VCS versus deploy to org. And then you'd be able to do a commit as well from here. See, save to branch or deploy from branch. Those are going to be your options. Okay. I hope that answers that question. So here we are. I did kick that off. What does all this mean? So a couple of things. Number one, I want to know, out of curiosity, here are the results for this entire deployment. We're going to bring that up. For auditing purposes, I want to know what all this means. Essentially, the most amazing part of this, I did not have to go in and create a separate deployment for each one of these objects. I strung them all together. We did an insert here, updates here. Appops is smart enough to know whether or not it's going to do an update or an insert. It's going to automatically track all of the record IDs as they are moving from the source to the destination. And this right here, we process everything in batches. So the first time we went through, we found 3 records that matched this criteria. We went through and automatically did a second pass as part of our system of checks and balances to make sure that we found everything this data set cared about. So look, it found 18 more account records that needed to come through. Awesome. We know that the account has to come before the contacts and the opportunities. So look at that. It automatically went through, did that for me, brought over the contacts, brought over the opportunities. In addition to that, I know that all of that, let's see if I can bring one of these up. I want to see what the batch results for this. It looks like it processed and moved 11 records. What were they? Oh, here they are. Here's your source and your destination record URL. If I wanted to, I can bring these up side by side to verify that this was done correctly. Okay. In addition to that, I moved 11 records in 5 seconds. Cool. What about the whole thing? I moved that entire deployment in 6 minutes. Great. We've tracked it. We have moved something like 3,000 records in a matter of 3 minutes. So it really depends on the data set, what is moving, how. We can move entire implementations like this. This is a lot of records that we just went through and moved. As another example of that. And we did all of that, and I will say this here. So this is 00021, right? There it is, 00021. Here's the actual deployment result. We did that in 21 minutes. All of this. Multiple objects, all part of this. This was part of a Sales Cloud, a Revenue Cloud, Sales Cloud seeding event that we needed to do for actually this this environment when we first set it up. Here it is.
Abby, we do have another question here.
Sure.
Will all record IDs match production when migrating metadata and data via Appops?
So when we're talking about record IDs, that's record IDs, metadata, separate from record IDs, right? So the beauty of Appops is not that Appops is going to come in and like essentially manipulate your record IDs so that they match production. What it is going to do, it's going to attach essentially a GPS coordinate to your record. So let's go back really quick. Let me bring up, and I'm going to change screens really quick. So bear with me one moment. we're going to come back to this, okay? So we know that whenever a record moves from production to a dev box, not these, because these are exact replicas of production, so these record IDs are going to match between production, full, and partial. The issue is when we go from production to a dev box, that record ID changes. From a dev to a dev, the record ID changes. From dev back to partial, it changes, okay? From partial to prod, it'll change. So we attach a GPS coordinate to that, and we store that GPS coordinate. So every single time the record ID changes, it doesn't matter because Prodly knows that we have seen it before. And so we will know automatically whether or not we are doing an update or an insert. And that is what we call our virtual external ID. And so let me bring up and show you what that looks like right here. Virtual external ID was the upsert method that was chosen. So if you are running into situations where maybe you didn't have Prodly yet and you had to manually create the same record in multiple places, do you want to change your upsert method? Is there a different method that I can use to force Prodly to look at maybe different fields instead of the record ID? Because these are exact same records, but the record ID is different, so on and so forth. Yes, we do give you the ability to go in and change your upsert method so that way you can merge records in, let's say, full and staging. So if someone had to manually create the same record in 3 different dev boxes before they had Prodly, and now it's time to marry those records in staging, yeah, you could do that. But that's essentially what that is virtual external ID. So again, every time that record ID changes, we track the change of that record ID. So that way we know for a fact we've seen it before and you won't have to worry about dupes. Any other questions about that? So there it is, guys. You know, and then obviously having everything be instantaneous. We know that this is all, I moved all of these objects with a single button click because I was able to do that with a deployment plan. So we string all of these data sets, individual data sets together. Look at step 1, step 2, step 3. We tell Prodly, hey, these are the steps that we want you to follow, or you can literally put them all together in the same step and let Prodly figure it out if you really wanted to. But yeah, you put them all together in a single deployment plan, you hit deploy once, and all of this happens on the back end. You come back, go out, have lunch, have a cup of coffee, come back, and here you are. Because again, we were able to do all of this in 21 minutes. No manual tracking, no having to come here and run this multiple times to make sure that all these objects were taken care of. I don't have to go into the destination and manually reconnect any of these things. It's done for me. Is there anything else, Joe, that anyone else wanted to see?
We do have one more question, and please keep your questions coming. We have a little extra time right now, so we can answer a couple more. Another question we got, is Appops any different than Mover?
So Mover is where we started. Mover and Appops, we are still Prodly. What you are seeing is the next evolution of Mover. Does Mover still move your records from A to B? Yes, but we do so much more now that it was, we were selling ourselves short by calling ourselves just Mover. So now we are Prodly Appops because it's, you know, operations. It's application operations. Same thing, you have development operations, DevOps. We are the declarative side to that. So in addition to be able to move your records from point A to point B, which is essentially what Mover was, we now have the ability to move metadata within that. We now have the ability to test that data as it goes into different environments. We can actually set up regression testing for those environments, and then the ability to go through and do version control now. So it's a little bit of everything. And then the other stuff that we have on the roadmap to be able to build and analyze the things that you are developing. So we wanted a different name that was going to be all encompassing. That's the only difference.
One more question here, Abby. What security access does a user need in each environment?
So because this runs within Salesforce's UI, all of the same sharing rules will apply. So after you've downloaded and installed our application, you have a couple of options for different types of permission sets depending on who you wanted to be able to do what within these environments. If you wanted to lock down who can create connections, you can do that, using just our permission sets. Now, outside of those things, it comes down to whatever your sharing rules are for these environments. What that means is only the people who would normally have access to that data are able to see it and move it. Only the people who would normally have access to that entire environment via a login are able to even create a connection to it, ergo see and move that data. So, and you, again, it's within Salesforce's UI, so all of Salesforce's normal compliance applies.
Great, I
I'm,
think that's all the questions we have. So unless there's any last things you'd like to add, Abby?
um, the only other thing is, as far as getting more advanced with this, I did mention the ability to automate this, and you can. We do have like Apex classes that people can use. So as they go through and refresh the sandbox, they can just plug an Apex class into there and have it automatically seed that sandbox at the time of refresh. So if you've got a dev box that is yours that you refresh often per project, you can have it automatically seed your dev box with any deployment plan or data set. We do have Salesforce DX plugins. So for any of the super extra devs on this call that want to get really fancy with CLIs, absolutely. We have also expanded our support for DX within the CLI, so you can do that as well. There's a lot of different ways that you can do API calls to Prodly. Again, because we are within Salesforce, you have the ability to do that. Any way that you would normally manipulate records, because again, all of these things are just a record. So if you wanted to pull any information from any of this and you wanted to do an API call to do those things, by all means, because we are within Salesforce. So I think that's really the closing thing here is, honestly, there's nothing you can't do with this. I know that if it's data and it exists in Salesforce, I can do it from here. I don't have to log in to separate apps to do things. I don't have to click in multiple areas to move things. I can move data and metadata at the same time. I can put it in multiple places and I don't have to worry about it. That's really it.
Great. Well, I think we can wrap it up there. I'd like to thank Abby for presenting and thank you all for joining today. If you are interested in learning more, if you have a contact at Prodly, please reach out and they can go more in depth with this. If you don't, please reach out on our website. We'd love to talk and see how we can help you revolutionize your sandboxes. So thank you for the time today and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Thanks, Abby.
You are most welcome. Have a great day, guys.